Hello, everybody. My name is Ben.
Hello. I'm Luke.
Yes, and we are Pukajay Productions. It's been a little while since we've got together on a podcast, but sometimes we're coming to you from California. In this case, only half of us is. I'm talking out of my house up here in the very sunny and warm climates of Northern California.
And I am talking through a rather crappy microphone from Greece, the Dodecanese Islands.
Indeed. Who has just been through an earthquake. You do okay with that, Luke?
6.7?
I was talking to you at the time, as I recall, and I think your words were, "Oh shit, I think we're having an earthquake."
Oh, there wasn't much thinking about it. It was a really strong, rolling motion. I've being a Southern California resident, I've lived through, I was there for the Northridge quake and a bunch of other ones, but I could tell this one was over a 6, and it hit the island of Kos, which is a little northwest of here, pretty hard. A few people died, which is unfortunate. But here we were pretty lucky. So
well, that's about as close to an earthquake as I've been. The first-hand account of it while it's happening, I haven't. I think from all the people that we were talking to at the time, I was the only one that hadn't been through an earthquake, which I'm not sure if that puts me in the minority or not.
Well, living in Northern California, you have greatly increased your chances of living through a severe or not living through a severe earthquake, as the case may prove to be.
Well, Australia, Australia's not known for its seismic activity, but it certainly does happen occasionally. I know there's an earthquake in Newcastle, some other places here and there. Well, New Zealand had a big one a little while ago. So we do live on an active planet, it turns out.
I saw an interesting study on the Forbidden City in China, which is incredibly earthquake-proof. It's lived through many of the largest recorded earthquakes. Yeah, largest wooden palace complex in the world. Yes, so they built a scale replica of that and put it on, an earthquake machine. And it withstood a 10.2 earthquake, the way that is constructed.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's right in the middle of Beijing, right in front of Tiananmen Square. Largest, 999 rooms. They had a thing for the esoteric numbers, but amazing place. A lot of the colors still intact.
You spent quite a bit of time in China.
Time in China. Yeah, I've been there probably.
I have yet to go. I'm envious of that.
A lot of it was just in the office buildings in the previous career, but I certainly used the chance while I could to get out and about. And a lot of the first several years that I went there, I was traveling around a lot, and I got to see a lot of the countryside. Yeah, beautiful place. Beautiful place.
I know Raymond has been trying to get us to go out there and look at some of those Chinese pyramids.
There's a lot to see out there. As long as it's not down there.
It would be interesting.
Well, as long as you're not staring at the barrel of a Chinese police force gun saying, "Stop looking at our hillside," but
I know.
We've been planting trees on these for 30 years. You guys can't take pictures of them now.
Well, this is the thing. What we're doing tonight is we're talking about some stuff in the news that we're going to try to catch up on a little bit. We can't really talk about everything because we don't have time, but one of the things we're not going to talk about is this sandstorm in Iran, which just uncovered another ancient site there. They're not even sure yet how old it is, and it's just really unfortunate. I was talking to a guy in January who's from Lebanon, who's been out to Iran a couple of times, and this is before Trump became our president, and he was saying, you should really go and check those sites out, and the people are really friendly, and they actually like Americans.
Oh, yeah.
In spite of the political bullshit, yada, yada, yada. And,
well, very progressive back in the day, Iran.
It's just something I can't really see happening in our political future. The freedom to go to some of these countries and look at the ancient sites, and it makes me really sad because both Iraq and Iran, and all parts of the Middle East, essentially, there's a lot of very interesting stuff there that is never going to be excavated until we evolve a little bit, I think.
Perhaps, yeah. I mean, it's weird, wasn't it? I mean, before the Shah, the regime in Iran was quite progressive and Western, and that's a lot of truth. I know some Iranian people very well. In fact, I worked with a girl that Marjan, she's out there I for a long time, and she travelled back and forth to Iran. She had family there, and also I've got some good Iranian friends that are now living in the States here. But yeah, I don't think that's a people issue. I think you just have
the guy they had before the Shah. I mean, the UK and the USA. He was going to take control of their gas and oil reserves, as they probably should, and the UK and the US did everything they could and put the Shah in control.
We more or less created the clusterfuck that we're dealing with over there at the moment.
We've made our own bed.
Right? Yeah, well,
we have made our own bed.
You can watch a lot on that. I mean, that's a deep hole to dive into. That is something we are not going to talk about. You're right, and it's something Luke said. So there's been a lot that's happened. I mean, we've been doing some podcasts and talking about and doing site reviews. We've been doing a lot of traveling. Luke's been doing a lot more just recently, and something that's been going on and we really wanted to get to is that there's lots of news. There's been a lot of real shake-ups across science, and particularly sciences that really apply to the thing that we're chasing down, which is the murky past of human origins and particularly human civilization on this planet. There's been a whole bunch in the last few months that's really happened to change that picture up. A lot of people, I think, you look at history and they look at the history of our civilization as something that's kind of been determined and set in stone, but it's really very much an interpretation of a spotty set of data, and there's people pass it off as being sort of set in stone, but it's something that I think Graham Hancock likes to say it, right? History's built on sandy foundations. There's the house of histories, the foundations are rotting, it's falling down, and there's been a lot that's happened just recently that really shakes up some of the earliest picture of our history. So I think we can go through. We wanted to go through a few of these articles and sort of try and tie them together, explain them, discuss them just a little bit.
Yeah, we've got some fossil stuff that we're going to talk about. And,
definitely do.
I'm looking forward to this, and this wasn't really my area of interest when I got into the ancient civilizations, and Ben very quickly sort of turned me on to some Lloyd Pye and other stuff, sort of examination of the human animal and the fossil record a little bit. And it's been an interesting journey since I've sort of diverged a little into Neanderthal explorations. But,
you like that Neanderthal?
It's very, I think it's all very, because I think what all of this, for me, the ancient civilizations, the spiritual side of things, these ancient cultures, what they were doing, their connection with this duality and the afterlife and the things you need to do to get there and this stuff, it all sort of ties in for me with this question of, who are we? Where do we come from? What the hell is this experience? What is this all about? And I think, bottom line is that's really what we're all trying to figure out. And I think that's what science really is. Who are we? What are we? What is this? And, most of us are caught in this sort of wage slave reality where, our concern is so financial that we can't spend any time thinking about and trying to discover, what is this? What do I need to do? How do I, get out of this? How do I become a better, whatever it is. And
well, not just purely wage slave, Storm. This is the trap, I think, of modern society in a lot of ways, right? It's the distractions that are offered, distractions that are unparalleled through all of human history. I mean, you can go back. There's study after study that show hunter-gatherers weren't as busy as we were. We sort of view the past as hunter-gatherer origins as these people that were just scratching a living and trying desperately to stay alive, and all of their energy bent on that. It's not really the case. We're actually far more busy with. Like you say, people have to work a job to survive in society, but then the distractions that are on offer to then spend your time, whether it's celebrity culture or whatever flavor of the week that you're spending umpteen hours on the internet or watching cable television.
It's contributing directly to the decline of our civilization. Even if you just look at children and how when we were kids we had to read, and I love reading and I still read, but if I grew up as a child today, I don't know if I'd crack a book. There's so much interesting, there's just this onslaught of graphics and CGI and interactive stuff that the book seems really boring. And that is going to contribute greatly to our decline as a species.
Well, that's an interesting point. Well, yeah, we're that's in the fifth stage of civilization, which is decadence. If you look at, there's been a few studies on life cycles of civilizations, and some actually I just was watching a documentary about this recently. Some World War II general did a study on civilizations, and you can pretty much map these. There's a 5-stage life cycle of great civilizations through history, and they all pretty much follow the same pattern. And particularly, this is a comparison that's made a lot, is between the Western civilization and the Roman civilization, right? You get to this peak of everyone's got resources, everyone's got time. There's a lot of spare time. There's everything is functioning towards everybody having plenty, and it just leads in a path towards this decadence and then ultimately a fall. And it does feel a little bit like we're heavily into that decadence phase in terms of the Western society in general. It's hard not to describe it in any other way. We live like kings.
Yeah, and if you look at all the justifications for all the things that we're doing to maintain this illusion of things being okay when we're obviously so out of balance with our environment and it's causing massive problems. And I'm not just talking about climate change, but everything that goes with us having such a large footprint, on the earth, and we're divorced from it, we're detached from it, and we're distracted from it, and that's
right.
We have to.
It's a self-perpetuating cycle. I mean, that's fundamentally at the root of all this is ultimately money, right? This is economic theory and modern economics and Keynesian economics. It doesn't take into account at all the concept of being in a closed loop environment where there are finite resources. So what ultimately leads to is this relentless pursuit of profit and growth at the cost of nothing else. I mean, the best example, I have a great analogy for it. It's the cardboard packaging industry. Have you noticed over the last 10, 15, 20 years that the packaging for things, Amazon, whatever it is, but the packaging on stuff that you order and you get delivered has progressively gotten much more bulky, complex. Like the shit you buy from a store now that requires an angle grinder to open the effing plastic box. Like you used to be able to tear things apart. No longer. Now it's been welded together in some CAD 3D printed in a factory design just to stamp this thing out. It's because the packaging industry...
You need a blowtorch to get into some of this shit.
Yeah, you need like a katana and just take a swing at it. It's because the packaging industry, like all industries, needs to show growth. It needs to have profits. It needs to continue to evolve and grow. And like that's it. We just got to keep getting bigger and better and more and more and more.
Of continual expansion, like we can continue to expand endlessly. Like at a certain point, it's like we haven't reached the limit.
We better catch up on the mining the belt part of this because as in the asteroid belt, because there's only so many rare earth minerals in this planet.
I saw a great cartoon the other day, and it said, "Yes, this is the end of our civilization, but for a really beautiful window there, we provided excellent returns for our shareholders." And I'm like, that's pretty much what is going on, and it's so disgusting. But.
And well, let's face it, and you and me and this generation, the current crop, right now, we are those shareholders. Like we're just, we're reaping it. It's nice and all, but we should probably be aware of it and planning on it based around the effect that finite resources are going to have. Like, actually, one more example that I really enjoyed I watched the other day is that this was again like a strategic documentary. This was about, I think it was Royal Dutch Shell. So Shell, they've got these sort of petroleum companies, these guys, they do obviously project forward. Then a lot of these companies are very smart about how they employ strategic advice. And I've worked with some strategic groups and some of these types of people in Singapore, and particularly ones involved in that IT world, long-term strategy and planning and trend analysis and all that sort of stuff. And so peak oil was a thing that happened and it sort of went away. We're discovering more oil resources here and there, but it's still a finite supply. And the latest predictions for sort of running out of oil coming from Royal Dutch Shell are something like 2075, 2070, something like this date. But they have this twofold plan for how to get there. There are really two options for this is like Western civilization, not just Western but the world. There and you get to 2075, you're going to be roughly in the same place in terms of strategic resources and all the rest of it. One is this planned method, and the planned method would require all of the countries getting together, recognizing this is the problem, planning around it, understanding how to share resources to minimize conflict. The other way we get there is a chaos method, which really you end up in exactly the same place in this 2075 period, and in terms of resources. But one method leaves a lot more blood on the table than the other, which obviously is the chaos method, which means to get to this point we end up finding wars and we'll be up and down about all this. Guess which one these world-renowned and recognized strategists at Royal Dutch Shell are betting on?
Oh, the chaos. Gotta be the chaos.
They're just like, we can get there. Like, we can do it. It's that great conundrum, right? We have the technology. We can feed everyone. We human population is not such a big issue that we can't solve it.
That's the problem.
It's profit.
If you feed everybody, there's no profit. You have to create a demand by restricting the supply.
You got to create scarcity. That's right. Yeah, and it all comes down because of money and profit and this Keynesian economics theory. Anyway, we're just short on to. We're probably not the end of the evolutionary chain. If I was watching this planet from space, I'm not sure I'd want us spreading anywhere.
We're an ugly blip.
Yes. Well, a blip as we are, perhaps it's time we should start looking back at our past a little bit.
Sure.
But yes, enough off that pessimistic little worldview that I have at the moment. So let me start with this. And well, the other one last thing that I'll throw in here is that if you are watching this on YouTube, and I do want to give a shout out to everybody who subscribed to us on YouTube. Thank you very much. Our numbers are still growing. Appreciate those shares. Please do keep sharing our stuff out. We hope you enjoy it. We just released a 2-part video with Graham Hancock. I'd like to give a stiff middle finger up to the YouTube Podcast Affiliates Network YouTube user. He's copying our stuff relentlessly, which is nice of him.
And claiming he has the copyright.
Claiming he has the copyright for it.
I found really amusing.
It was difficult to believe, seeing as I recorded that about 5-6 years ago by my own phone.
He even ripped like the photo that you took and claimed that was his as well.
The photo is from that trip. That's funny. Yeah.
Yeah. The funny thing is, I'd like to see if he rips the second part of that, because it's, I mean, obviously we're publishing it first. Where's his second part? Is he going to put that out ever? Guess
I'm sure he will. Yeah, that was great. So what we're going to do with these podcasts, if you're watching it, I said, normally we do video stuff. We're going to move to an audio-only focus because just simply that's the audience for podcasts if we want to get this on iTunes or anything. We
may still do some video stuff from time to time. We're definitely going to keep making videos that will go up on YouTube, but for the podcast, we're going to do definitely more audio. Yeah,
and try to do them a little more frequently, so I'm not doing a ton of editing on them and whatnot, but we can... this will work better. Fault. No, we can get onto iTunes.
In random places with not very good internet.
Yes, well, this happens. This happens to all of us occasionally. In fact, I live on a microwave connection, so it's kind of a small miracle this thing happens at all. But moving to an audio-only format, and then hopefully you'll be able to see us on iTunes. I've had a lot of requests to get these out as MP3s, to get these onto those sort of podcast libraries, so bear with us. We're doing that, and this should actually be the first in the remaining series of these will be audio and definitely available on those libraries. Okay. All right, so... Again, this was the concept here is, and it's sort of the theme that I've got for a few of these articles is that, mankind, this our past, the picture is changing. Like, this is a really fluid environment, and the numbers keep on stretching out. Turns out we just are older and older and older than we think we are, right? And there's been a lot that's happened. And one of the big ones that came up, and I think we were going to talk about the Mastodon find, weren't we? So this was an article in Nature.
Yeah.
I'm reading from a Science News article, but it's basically referencing an article in Nature.
Yeah, there's one in Nature, there's one in Nat Geo, right?
Well, there's a Nat Geo article on this as well. In fact, we'll listen to a little bit of that Nat Geo. There's a little YouTube clip here I want to play on it, but ultimately the source is an article published in Nature from several researchers. And now let me quote here. So this was April 26th. And quote, first settlers reached Americas 130,000 years ago, study claims. And again, quoting from the article, an unidentified Homo species used stone tools to crack apart mastodon bones, teeth, and tusks approximately 130,700 years ago at a site near what's now San Diego. Oh,
I do apologize. That was that video on that site queuing up.
It does. It auto plays. Yes.
Yeah, it does.
Back to this article. This unsettling claim upended the scientific debate over the settling of the Americas, comes from a team led by archaeologist Stephen Holen of the Center for American Paleolithic Research in Hot Springs, South Dakota, and paleontologist Thomas DeMare of the San Diego Natural History Museum. If true, it means the Sereti Mastodon site contains the oldest known evidence by more than 100,000 years of human or human-like colonists in the New World, the researchers report online in April 26 in Nature. End quote. So there's an interesting article. But essentially, there's been a find, or it was actually a site that was dug up in, I think, 93, and an article published in 95 for the first time. But they've finally had the tools and the technology now to do some analysis.
It's not just that. I mean, yes, it is that, especially with this like sort of luminescence dating that they figured out a way to do.
Because they dated the bones.
Not only that, it's becoming a little bit easier now, I think, to talk about how old stuff is. When they say it's older than the first older than 30,000 years, they're wrong. I mean, as far as I can tell, because there's studies out of the University of South Carolina where they have found and dated human remains and cooking fires and stuff along the banks of the Savannah River and the the PhD archaeologist there at the University of Southern Carolina says that they are minimum 50,000 years old. 50,000 years old.
Yeah.
And that's a 14-year-old study, but you don't see anybody quoting it. You don't see anybody using it. And it's just another one of these things that just swept under the rug. Oh, that doesn't fit. That doesn't fit our Clovis first theory.
Yes,
which is
that's
what
right.
Was big at the time. You can't buck the Clovis first theory. It's like the bones that were 27,000-year-old bones that were found in that cave in the Midwest somewhere or Arizona, and the guy's career was ruined over that when he insisted they were 24 to 27,000 years old. It turns out he's right. Now we admit he's right, but in the meantime, they ruined that guy's career.
Yeah, well, that's the great vindication circle of science, right? This is the science, how science embraces its rebels in terms of, usually ruins their rebels, like Tesla. But J. Harlan Bretz, who's the originator of the Great Bretz Flood, was forever derided. And I think one of his quotes was that his only regret was that none of his detractors were alive to see him proven right, which eventually happened. Right. I think he died in the 80s. This is typical how science derides its rebels. And I think what we're seeing is exactly that. We're seeing the start of some of this sort of rebellious...
I'd bring up Michael D. Coe's book, too, Breaking the Maya Code. I would recommend reading that because there's some really excellent examples of people who were absolute titans in the field, who denied that the Mayan hieroglyphs were a written language for a long time until we figured out it was a logophonic language. Yeah. And those guys literally set back like the discovery of that language by over 50 years by insisting and crushing anybody's career who tried to prove otherwise. And now we don't even really remember their names. Yeah,
that's right. It's a good example. So let me read a bit more from this article, because what I want to do is explain a little bit. That's fine. We're going to talk about all these things. We kind of need to get into some of the details on this, and in terms of how they're dating it, what's happening, and then set the picture for actually the timelines and why some people have some issues, I guess, with the timelines, because we think that we have this concept that this ice age happened before us in this current warm time. But if you go back to the sort of dates that this article's talking about, 130,000 years ago, you actually go back to an earlier interglacial period, a warm period.
Yes.
So you didn't have land bridges, like the concept of this Siberian ice, the land bridge between Alaska, Siberia, that existed for people to walk across. This was actually an interglacial period. And as you'll find from another article, we've actually pushed back the date of modern Homo sapiens back to about 300,000 years ago. So now all of a sudden we're talking about a potential for actually living in a warm climate, which we've currently got. And you can see what we can do with 10,000 years in a warm climate. This is, the end result. And you have these catastrophes like asteroids and comets hitting the planet, wiping out those civilizations. It just opens up that picture, and it really makes it much more likely that we've been here a while, we've done some interesting things, and we may be looking at remnants of those interesting things when we stare at megalithic sites around the world. That's how this chain of evidence kind of mounts up towards supporting that overall picture. But so back to the article and quote. Around 130,000 years ago, the researchers say, a relatively warm and wet climate would have submerged any land connection between northeastern Asia and what's now Alaska. So ancient colonizers of North America must have reached the continent in canoes or other vessels and traveled down the Pacific coast, they propose. Candidates for Southern California's mastodon bone breakers include Neanderthals, Denisovians, and Homo erectus, all of which inhabited northeastern Asia around 130,000 years ago. And then for me, throwing in there, we've got other finds like this Morocco find that date Homo sapien back to at least 300,000 years now, which is 100,000 years older than where we were before. Right. And then back to the article now, to quote, a less likely possibility, Holland says, is Homo sapiens, which reached southern China between 80,000 and 120,000 years ago. They have a reference for this. No hominid fossils have turned up among the mastodon remains. So the way that they've dated this site is how the bones have been broken, and then by the stones and the stone tools that have been found with the mastodons. Yeah.
And they're saying that there's no way that small animals could have done it, because scavenging carnivores can't chew their way through the middle of like a fresh mastodon femur, because those things are massive. So it has to be something larger breaking the bones.
Well, they found the stones that did it there. They've actually got stone tools that have broken down, and then there's some questioning of the stone tools as well from skeptics. But basically what you've got is smashed up. And in fact, let me get to that, because it's an interesting little aspect of this, and this sort of gets into why there's some controversy around this. So, quote, excavation of the mastodon site occurred in 1992 and 1993 following its partial exposure during a construction project. I think it was a freeway. Backhoes and other heavy construction equipment can cause the same damage to mastodon bones that the new report attributes to an ancient Homo species, says archaeologist Gary Haynes of the University of Nevada, Reno. We'll debunk that in a minute, Gary. The ancient... quote, the ancient Southern California landscape also may have included streams that could have washed broken mastodon bones and large stones from separate areas to the spot that they were eventually unearthed, says archaeologist Vance Holliday of the University of Arizona in Tucson. So what he's saying is that, well, it might have just all washed up in the same place, despite the fact, and again, we'll debunk this in a minute too.
Against each other in streams and all this kind of
silly. And so to quote Vance here, he says, making a case for hominids on this side of the Pacific Ocean at 130,000 years ago is a very heavy lift, and this site doesn't make it. So he's basically he's simply, this is a logical fallacy. It's called an appeal to authority or appeal to establishment. He's debunking it and saying this can't have happened because we know it wasn't true. That's as far as I can tell. And he said, they might have all washed together. And so let's
this sort of thing happens a lot. Basically, what he's saying is, drag out grandma's 130,000-year-old bones. I ain't gonna believe it.
Right. So let me now debunk both of the pushbacks that have come on this article. So effectively, somebody said, well, you can dig it out, like backhoes and big equipment can make these marks, which I'm like, they're a little like they look like fresh marks, right? But then also, it might have washed together in a stream. So quoting from the article again, because this has already been pushed back on by the lead archaeologist, Fred Holland. So quote, construction machinery produces a distinctive damage to large bones that does not appear on mastodon remains at the California site, Holland says. Excavations of the bones and stones reached about 3 meters below the area originally exposed by heavy equipment. Now, end quote. It's 3 meters. It's 10 feet. You're not accidentally going to scratch a bone. I've got a backhoe. Trust me, accidentally digging 10 feet down that takes a little more effort than that. Oops, I've accidentally rendered the earth for 3 meters. The height of a basketball hoop above the ground. That's how, when they started to see the site, they called a halt, which actually happens at all projects in California. You've got to have a paleontologist or archaeologist on call, so when they find these things, they come in, they're very careful about it. So that's sort of nonsense. And then here is another quote from the article. So, analysis of sediment at the mastodon site indicate that streams did not wash in bones and stones from elsewhere, the scientists hold. It's also unlikely that trampling or gnawing by animals of all the fossilization process created the types of bone damage observed, they say. So this is effectively, it's the way that they know this is these stones came from this site, and I can actually let one of the authors of the study explain it himself. But it's in a sediment-rich layer. Like it's a to get these fossils. Again, this is kind of a miracle that fossils even happen. So this you have to be in this like I think it's a, what do you call it, like a swampy area, something that doesn't actually have stones in it. This was a swampy area that compressed and sort of preserved these specimens. That's why it was interesting that they found these stones there, because there are no stones at all in the surrounding area when you dig it up. So they think that the stones were actually carried in. Sounds
like Gary's full of shit.
Right. I agree. So that's the article. There's and let me just play one last little quote here.
In your front yard, Gary.
We are, actually, down there in San Diego. You're a little closer.
We're digging in your front yard.
So here's one of the other things that happens, and this is a little bit of a pushback from the authors. There's a YouTube on the National Geographic site that's worth watching. We'll probably link to it in this article and on the post in the YouTube. But this is the author of the study talking about where archaeologists look for stones and some of the things.
So for the archaeologists say that it's outrageous. How can this be? There's really no evidence other than this one site that the humans were here 130,000 years ago. One of the answers to that question is that, well, if archaeologists aren't looking at rocks this old, so how can they find evidence if they're not looking in the right place?
So, again, it's that self-confirming circle, right? We tend to look at stuff where in the place where we expect to find it. This is not something we expected to find, so you're not really looking for this.
We have to remember too that people act like it's very simple to make a fossil, but there are conditions that need to be exact for a fossil to occur, we're also not taking into account that large areas of North America were quite possibly wiped clean by that Younger Dryas glacial event.
That's right.
Uh,
Yeah.
There's a
There
lot
were.
of reasons why there are gaps in the fossil record in places.
Yeah, I mean, particularly northern United States. Well, northern Americas was smashed flat by glaciers during that, and this is after that period. Remember, there's 130,000 years ago was a warm period between about 120,000 years ago to about 15,000 years ago in the start of the Holocene. That was an ice age, and at the end of that ice age was this cataclysmic Younger Dryas period.
Right.
Most likely caused by a comet, and then certainly if you go back and look at the scablands and half of all the glacial erratics and the things lying around the northern half of the Americas continent, that most of it was ground to dust and powder by glaciers, billions of tons of ice and rock.
This is the interesting
remains.
thing, is that a lot of the stuff that we're starting to find, that we're not looking for, but we come across every once in a while, is a lot of the stuff is at the bottom of lakes that were flooded 9, 10, 11,000 years ago. Stone circles with carvings of mastodons.
Right.
You know, I mean, the stuff is there. The evidence is there. It's just whether we're willing to examine it and report on it.
Indeed. All right, that's interesting. You've got one, right? I think you've got some Indian articles.
I'm gonna take a little detour to India, and I'm gonna talk about there was a new discovery that was made recently, but it relates in some ways to some other discoveries. I'm just gonna read some of this stuff, and then maybe we can talk about a little bit of it. So the first article comes from the Tribune News Service, April 28th this year. And archaeologists will read, archaeologists have found traces of a prosperous pre-Harappan human habitation which is believed to have existed along the banks of the ancient Saraswati River at a site in Kunal village here during the ongoing excavation. I'm going to apologize right now if you're Indian and I'm murdering pronunciation of place names. The excavation, carried out in a joint collaboration by the Indian Archaeological Society, National Museum, and the Haryana Archaeological Department, has found materials that give a peek into the lifestyle, socioeconomic milieu, and food habits of the people who lived along the Saraswati Bank in ancient times.
Milieu.
It is believed to be contemporary to the Birana site, about 18 kilometers from Kunal, which is known as the oldest Indus Valley civilization site and belonged to the pre-Harappa era. The excavators found 4 gold beads and copper rings, which indicate that developed farming communities lived here. It also points towards the fact that metal and precious stones were imported from far-flung places. Silver ornaments were found here during the previous excavation. We have found charred bones at several hearths, indicating its eating habits. There are botanical remains of wheat and barley. Even fruit seeds have been found in the pots, said Subhan Malik, an excavator. Banani Bacharya, deputy director of the Haryana Archaeological Department, said the site was located around 18 kilometers from the Birana site. There are various sites in this region, including Birana, Kunal, and Rakijari. The excavation at these sites has indicated that these were Indus Valley civilization sites which had flourished near the Saraswati and Ghaggar rivers. This is stated to be one of the oldest pre-Harappan sites, which could be contemporary to the Birana village. The carbon dating of the Birana site revealed that it dates back to 7030 BC. That's 9,000 years ago. The excavation in Kunal has indicated that this site also belongs to the Hakra culture, and we have taken samples for C14 radio dating for the absolute dating of this site, said an excavator. A manufacturing unit of statite, I believe that's how it's pronounced, beads, has also been found at the upper crust of this site. So this is interesting again because
That's a lot
it's
of
another
culture for 9,000 years ago.
Yeah, it's a very involved, very large, very connected, functioning society 9,000 years ago. And this connects with another find from India, which I will read now. And this comes from the Times of India and indiadivine.org. And also there was a 2016 study published and peer-reviewed in Nature Journal on this.
Yeah.
And so I'll just read to you now. It may be time to rewrite history books. Scientists from IIT Kharagpur and Archaeological Survey of India have uncovered evidence that the Indus Valley civilization is at least 8,000 years old and not 5,500 years old, taking root well before the Egyptian, 7,000 BC to 3,000 BC, and Mesopotamian, 6,500 to 1,300 BC, or 3,100 BC civilizations. What's more, the researchers have found evidence for pre-Harappan civilization that existed for at least 1,000 years before this. The discovery, published in the prestigious Nature journal on May 25th, 2016, may force a global rethink on the timelines of the so-called cradles of civilization. The scientists believe they also know why the civilization ended about 3,000 years ago: climate change. And
well, we need to get some grants. So.
Yeah, basically they use that optically stimulated luminescence, which dates pottery or stone to the last time it was exposed to a significant amount of sunlight. So it's you can actually date stone and things made of clay and stuff. So that's very interesting.
Date their exposure at least.
Right. So
that's a lot of symbolic culture and civilization for that time period. Shit keeps getting older.
Absolutely. Right? And so let me just finish this real quick, and then we can talk about it. The team had actually set out to prove that civilization proliferated from two other Indian sites like Birana and Rakhichari in Haryana, apart from the known locations of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro in Pakistan, and Lothal and Dhalavira and Caliban in India. They took their dig to an unexplored site, Birana, and ended up unearthing something much bigger. The excavation also yielded large quantities of animal remains like bones, teeth, horn cores of cow, goat, deer, and antelope, which were put through carbon-14 analysis to decipher antiquity and the climatic conditions in which the civilization had flourished, said Arati Deshpande Mukherjee of Deccan College, which helped analyze the finds along with Physical Research Laboratory of Ahmedabad. The researchers believe that the Indus Valley civilization spread over a vast expanse of India, stretching to the banks of the now lost Saraswati River or the Gagar-Hakra River. But this has not been studied enough because, quote, what we know so far is based on British excavations. At the excavation sites, we saw preservations of all cultural levels right from the pre-Indus Valley civilization, 9,000 to 8,000 BC, to what we have categorized as now early Harappan, which is 8 to 7,000 BC, to the mature Harappan times, said Sarkar. The late Harappan phase witnessed large-scale deurbanization, a drop in population, abandonment of established settlements, lack of basic amenities, violence, and even the disappearance of Harappan script, the researchers said. We analyzed the oxygen isotope composition in the bone and tooth phosphates of these remains to unravel the climate pattern. And basically what they found out is that the 9,000 to 7,000 years ago, it was extremely lush, and then the monsoon started to fail and became weaker, and this slowly led to a decline in their civilization, but they developed a style of rotating crops and storing crops, and they were able to figure all this stuff out, and they were able to extend their civilization that way instead of completely disappearing.
Yeah.
So I just want to read the editor's note here, because I read this and, well, I'll just read it. Editor's note. Our ancient histories recorded in the Puranas trace back human civilization for millions of years. Yet people only want to believe things if they are written in English books by Westerners whose main motive is to declare their own religion as being the origin and source of humanity. The fact is, there are thousands of such undiscovered archaeological sites in India which remain hidden because there is little interest in such research by the government, and because there are tens of millions of people still living on tops of such places, like Delhi, which was Hastinapur in ancient times. Whereas other cities rose and fall with the passing of time, many ancient cities in India, such as Delhi, Varanasi, Ayodhya, etc., continue to be heavily populated, making such research nearly impossible. Others have entered the sea, such as Dwarka and Mahabalipuram, making research difficult. Still other sites are located in Pakistan, and the government there does not want to research them to prove the antiquity of Hindu civilization. What is being found is really only the tip of the iceberg. If we want to locate such ancient sites of human civilization, we need only to turn to the Puranas, and we can map out the entire history of the ancient world and the population centers of the ancient times. So,
she has a point.
There's that, and I just wanted to bring up before we leave India and before we talk about whatever you like from here.
I want to talk about this.
And if you remember, Graham Hancock talked an awful lot about Dwarka. He went and he dove off the coast there, and he looked at that stuff, and he took archaeologists with him. Do you remember
I was going to say when she said that the sea entered these cities, I mean, let's not forget the sea entered those cities probably 12,500 years ago.
Exactly. And here's a BBC News Online article from 2002. And this discovery has just been swept under the rug. Nobody talks about it. Nobody's gone out there. Nobody's done anything. I'm just going to read you here. The remains of what has been described as a huge lost city may force historians and archaeologists to radically reconsider their view of ancient history. Marine scientists say archaeological remains discovered 36 meters, that's 120 feet, underwater in the Gulf of Cambay off the western coast of India could be over 9,000 years old. The vast city, which is 5 miles long and 2 miles wide, is believed to predate the oldest known remains in the subcontinent by more than 5,000 years. The site was discovered by chance last year by oceanographers from India's National Institute of Ocean Technology conducting a survey of pollution. Now,
5 miles.
They use the site. Debris recovered from the site, including construction material, pottery, sections of walls, beads, sculpture, human bones, and teeth, has been carbon dated and found to be nearly 9,000 years old. Now, there's an archaeologist, an English guy who I'm not going to shame by naming him, but he immediately came out and said, well, carbon dating, that's just not really accurate. We're going to have to check out that stuff a lot better. That stuff, there's error margins in carbon dating. That site, there's no way we could know it's that old. And then you have to sit and think.
Exactly when was it flooded?
This guy, because how long has this been underwater?
Yeah,
I mean, it's just incredible. But this is the kind of just immediate pushback. It's like listening to Shermer in that debate with, they will argue. They will grab a small rock in that stream and they will hold on against the flow of that water as hard as they can to prove something that they don't know is true.
And they'll just keep pointing at the rock.
To consider the other side. That's all I'm saying. I don't.
Yeah. I'm with you, man. It's because it challenges the entire premise of, in a lot of cases, life's full of work or just, indoctrinated knowledge that I don't know why it's so defensive that there is just, and people use the most ridiculous and obvious logical fallacies. You talk about Sherman, we've been discussing this as a topic for an upcoming podcast to just go through and do an edit and a review of that conversation, because I don't know how many times I caught him in a straw man argument. And not engaging on any of the points, and oh my God, you've never been to Egypt? Well, but yeah, that's the reaction you get. But this should be front page news, right? This is a city that's 5 miles long. Yeah,
he's just pulls a hawas. Really, is essentially what he does by saying. He doesn't actually research specifically any of the things that he talked about. He just went, well, that can't be true. I hear the overall idea and I go, well, that can't be true. And then I look for reasons that can't be true. And then I just repeat those reasons without actually examining the initial
evidence, or engaging on the points.
Evidence.
Yeah. It's like, well, his argument in a lot of cases came down to, well, then there's this other author over here who thinks that they're all landing pads for spacecraft, and that's ridiculous. So you guys are the same. So none of it's true. There's science and then there's you guys. What are you doing? That's not an argument.
And your theories can't be discussed because there's 8,000 other theories. So we can only discuss one theory, apparently.
Yeah, well, that's another good example. Theory. Shit keeps getting older. I think there's again this concept that we've just been purely digging around in the dirt, not doing anything except chipping some stones and trying to desperately to hunt small creatures and eat blackberries. I think that's just continually being challenged by this. There's Göbekli Tepe now. There's this stuff in off the coast of India, and I hope that gets more exposure. Like as you say, Graham Hancock's been talking about it for a while now. There's actually an article talking about a city that is off the coast. That's 130 feet down. It's 5 miles long and 3 miles wide. We know when the sea level hit that point.
9,000 years old.
At least 9,000 years, and more like. That's the earliest possible date it is too. Remember that. Like a lot of times, carbon dating and that type of thing, you're getting organic remains from the last person, or could have been the last person that was there. And typically, organic remains get covered up and they get moved. You're getting the most recent date in most cases with carbon dating, and in some cases, I think this applies to some of the Egyptian stuff. I think you're getting the carbon dating from the last loincloth wearing dude that bloody built a campfire next to the pyramid or whatever and stared up to it with as much mystery and reverence as we do today. That's the equivalent of a lot of those carbon dates.
Even if it's the first ones who wandered up and went, what the hell is this?
That?
Let's live here.
Yes, carbon dating doesn't help you a lot when it comes to stone. Somebody is calling me. Okay.
Well, that's the thing. I think that you've got with Walker, that's indeed what that city is.
Yeah.
You've got a civilization that was active at the same time as Göbekli Tepe.
Oh, for sure.
And there have been some new discoveries
right.
with Göbekli Tepe. We're just not going to have time to get to that.
We'll get into that. So I want to throw in another one that is along the same lines of this stuff keeps getting older. And in particular, I think this is very significant because this actually shifts back the date of, this gets into the DNA, the origins of Homo sapien, like which is us. So there's a bit of background here. So this number has kept getting older and older and older as we've gone forward, right? For the longest time we thought it was 100,000 years. Then there was a find, the most recent, up until now at least, find was one in Ethiopia that dated us at 195,000 years. And that's also one of the reasons you get the out of Africa theories, and we can get into that in a bit later. But now we've sort of shifted that date back as well. So let me quote from a Reuters article that was published June 7th. And in fact, I think this also references a Nature article as the original source, but this sort of we'll give you some background here. So quoting from the article, Moroccan fossils shake up understanding of human origins. So the understanding of human origins was turned on its head on Wednesday with the announcement of the discovery of fossils unearthed on a Moroccan hillside that are about 100,000 years older than any other known remains of our species, Homo sapiens. Scientists determined that skulls, limbs, bones, and teeth representing at least 5 individuals were about 300,000 years old, a blockbuster discovery in the field of anthropology. The antiquity of the fossils was startling, a big wow, as one of the researchers called it. But their discovery in North Africa, not East or even Sub-Saharan Africa, also defied expectations. Funny that. And the skulls with faces and teeth matching people today, but with archaic and elongated brain cases, showed our brain needed more time to evolve its current form. So this is kind of interesting. You get into some of the elongated skull things, and what he's saying is that our faces and teeth and bones, our facial structure was that of the human, but the brain itself, like the case itself wasn't the same shape as ours, a little more elongated. So let's go back to the article here. Before the discovery at the site called Jebel Irode, located between Marrakech and Morocco's Atlantic coast, the oldest Homo sapiens fossils were known from an Ethiopian site called Omo Kabish, dated to 195,000 years ago. And this is quote, again, in the article, quote, "The message we would like to convey is that our species is much older than we thought and that it did not emerge in an Adamic way in a small Garden of Eden somewhere in East Africa. It is a Pan-African process and more complex scenario than has been envisioned so far," end quote, Hubland said. The Moroccan fossils found in what was a cave setting represented 3 adults, 1 adolescent and 1 child, roughly age 8, thought to have lived a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. There is broad agreement among scientists that Homo sapiens originated in Africa. These findings suggest a complex evolutionary history probably involving the entire continent, with Homo sapiens by 300,000 years ago dispersed all over Africa. So this has actually also been challenged. This concept itself has been challenged by a number of other things not referenced in this article, but we can talk about after. The whole out of Africa thing's being a little bit challenged, although you're kind of touching that third rail of politics in terms of something that's diversity or social, the social justice worrying topics. It's likely to get us some protests, but I just wish we could follow the science on this. Let's go back to the article. So the Jebel Irode people had large brain cases that lacked the globular shape of those today. Max Planck Institute paleoanthropologist Philip Guns said the findings indicate the shape of the face was established early in the history of Homo sapiens, but brain shape and perhaps brain function evolved later. I don't think there's really any evidence for the function part of that. He's just basically correlating shape to function, which I'm not sure is the case, given that Neanderthals had bigger brains than we did, and we seem to have outlasted them. Seem to have been smarter by all accounts, but you never can tell. I'm not sure shape's related to function, is all I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
One last little bit of this, and we can chat about this, but let me just finish off this article. So, but given their modern-looking face and teeth, Hubland said, these people may have blended in today if they simply wore a hat, as I think depicted on most Egyptian hieroglyphs and pictures. They often wear this hat, funnily enough, to accommodate a very long, elongated skull. Maybe it's just me. Back to the article. Homo sapiens is now the only human species, but 300,000 years ago it would have shared the planet with several now extinct cousins in Eurasia, Neanderthals in the west and Denisovians in the east, and others in Africa. Hubland did not hazard a guess as to how long ago the very first members of our species appeared, but he said it could not have been more than 650,000 years ago when the evolutionary lineage that led to Homo sapiens split from the one that led to Neanderthals. So what he's saying is that's in fact DNA evidence that suggests that, like, if you look at our evolutionary change, it was 650,000 years ago that we actually had a common ancestor with the Neanderthals, and that's where we split. And somewhere in between there and us is this concept of a missing link, right? That or many missing links as would be required to go from them to us. And I would encourage anyone that's interested in that topic to go and watch. I think you referenced it before, but Lloyd Pye's "Everything You Know Is Wrong" documentary. The first half of it's great. He gets a little Sitchin-y towards the end of it. Fair warning. Not sure I'm on board with all the Anunnaki stuff, but I really like his work on the human evolutionary aspects. But this is interesting, right? So we've just shifted us back another 100,000 years, and it's also another 100,000 years of overlap with all these other species.
Yeah. Since then, there've been I read a study a couple weeks ago where the scientists reporting the study felt comfortable to put a date of 270,000 years on remains that they were reporting about. And I tell you, before this study came out, or article or revelation that these remains were 300,000 years old, like they wouldn't have been comfortable doing that. They would have had to like kind of stick it into that 160 to 200,000 year window, so as not to jeopardize the rest of their research
and their sensitive reputations.
In
fact, we want to get go. Yeah.
No, I was going to say another thing about that article that I think is interesting too is that these things are quite old, and they would have been living in a previous warm climate
for sure
period. And so a lot of that Mediterranean, which separates Europe and Turkey, etc., from North Africa, what we think of North Africa and Italy too, how much lower were those water levels? How interconnected was that? How much easier was it even to travel between those areas?
I'm pretty sure sea levels were higher even than they are today. But yeah, that's right. There's an entirely different climate. It extends the time back to where we're part of it, right? So it's understandable to in an ice age. It's much more difficult. I think we've in previous conversations, and certainly it's something we can revisit. But there's a strong correlation between warm climates and people doing well, right? Food grows more. It's just everything's more plentiful. You have more time, more daylight, more everything, more energy. A warmer planet encourages life, and we're no exception to that. The Dark Ages and the plague were associated with a dip in climate, in global temperatures. I mean, the parts per million of CO2 got so low, plant life nearly died, like 250. It's not very good. I mean, the megafauna, megaflora of the great past, you had parts per million like around 4,000 for CO2. It turns out life does just fine with a higher CO2 element, and certainly our species does great too. But what this is doing, though, is saying, yes, there was an ice age from like 120,000 years ago till fairly recently into the start of the Holocene, but it turns out we're actually part of the period before that as well. So there's a really nice warm period before that, and we're there's at least something that looks exactly like us and is directly related to us. Like, I mean, these are Homo sapien fossils that they found in Morocco, but we're in that period. So it's just, to me, it just opens up that window of you've now got humans existing in a warm period in temperate zones in good areas. I mean, the possibilities for high civilization and to actually get places based on looking at the behavior of humans today and the established behavior we've had over the last 10,000 years of real history that we can account for, like that just opens up that door to it makes it much more likely that we're looking at stuff that could be a lot older than we think it is. And when you combine that with that global cataclysm concept, like these comets and these impacts that really wipe the Earth clean and they can end civilizations. We know this. We've all seen the movies. Certainly you should read the books, but they'll, they can end civilizations. And I think it just opens up that picture. It lets us, we should be considering these as legitimate answers to these mysterious questions we have. And I think you'll find when you start looking at a lot of these sites in that particular light, it makes the answers a lot more plausible. And that's kind of the point of what we're trying to do.
It's certainly in there. I mean, who were the people who left these things behind? And it really does seem like things were left behind. And when you go to Peru and you see some of the remnants of the megalithic stuff, which is always unfinished or partial, and later finished by standard Inca work, when you see some of the really old Egyptian stuff, and you see how different and how much more difficult it was from the later stuff. And I think there's a lot of stuff in India I need to go there and see. But there's places around the world you go and you see these ancient structures, and there's a different understanding. There's a different way of working with the stone than we have now.
That's right. Something was going
there's
on.
Definitely, the
I don't have the answers.
The people who like to, throw aliens and stuff into it because it seems so far-fetched that we'd be able to do that in a distant past. But I think it was somebody like us, or very much like us. And this is sort of where I'm going a little bit with the Neanderthal thing, because I'm not. I think I may have disagreed just a little bit, just in the way that I have a feeling that Neanderthals were. I don't think they are older than us, but at least as far as we can tell. But I think they are just a different version of us. And
they're very close to us. That's the nature of it.
Yeah. I don't think we necessarily came directly from them, but there's. And let me get to this. Do we?
What I wanted to throw in was this other because it went with this 300,000-year-old thing, which was the, and again I wanted to talk about that out of Africa thing. This was the missing link. May have been European, not African. Ancient fossils suggest. So this is the jawbone. Let me quickly get through this and then we'll move on. So I'm quoting from a Sky News article that was published the 23rd of May 2017. Again, I'm not sure whether they're sourcing it from, but we'll get there. So let me quote this. The birthplace of modern man may have been the Eastern Mediterranean rather than Africa, according to scientists studying newly discovered ancient fossils of a tooth and lower jawbone. The remnants found in Bulgaria and Greece belong to an ape-like creature, Graciopithecus freibergi, believed to be the oldest known pre-human, dating back as far as 7.2 million years. So this is our direct ancestors. It means that it was hundreds of thousands of years older than what was previously thought to have been the most ancient potential human ancestor discovered in East Africa, long known as the cradle of humanity. Researchers from an international team of the University of Tübingen in Germany say that the findings entirely changed the beginning of human history and placed the last common ancestor of both chimpanzees and humans, the so-called missing link, in the Mediterranean region. The controversial claim is based on the dental characteristics of the Graciopithecus. Graciopithecus fossils, according to the lead researcher, Professor Madeleine Bohm. While great apes typically have 2 or 3 separate and diverging roots, the roots of Graciopithecus converge and are partially fused, a feature that is characteristic of modern humans, early humans, and several pre-humans. So we're looking at the forming of the dental roots effectively as an evolutionary link somewhere in between us and whatever our common ancestor was. Co-author Professor David Began from the University of Toronto in Canada said, "This dating allows us to move the human-chimpanzee split into the Mediterranean area. This study changes the ideas related to the knowledge about the time and the place of the first steps of the humankind," said Professor Nikolai Spasov from the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. Graciopithecus is not an ape. He is a member of the tribe of hominins and the direct ancestor of Homo. The food of the Graciopithecus was related to the rather dry and hard savanna vegetation. Therefore, like humans, he has wide molars and thick enamel. So, that's additionally I think it goes with that last find just in terms of there's a more global picture of how our species has evolved over time, right? We're not just stuck in Africa until then. We've come from, I think there's a high likelihood that we've come from all over the place. This in particular place is the earliest origin of us in
there may well have been something that separated populations fairly early on.
Yeah.
I just don't think we know enough to say where the starting point is. I have nothing against the starting point being in Africa. Like, I really don't.
Oh no, I just want to follow the science.
I just don't necessarily find the current out of Africa theory entirely convincing.
Well, the latest, I watched another article that said the latest DNA evidence suggests that it's the actually Australian Aboriginal as the oldest kind of part of Homo sapien.
Yeah, I've been following that. There's a lot of different theories.
There's also
I'm not sure there's an Asian theory as well.
There's actually not a lot of support. I mean, not direct. If you're trying to get the actual direct evidence that supports the out of Africa theory, there's obviously the finds that they found in Africa, but now have been outdated by the Moroccan find. But there actually was a study. There's a lot of genetic indicators. I saw a study that looked at there's like 28 or 29 different genetic markers that support the out of Africa concept. So we're looking at people's DNA roots and tracing them back and seeing, do you have this marker in your DNA change that suggests that yes, your direct lineage has come from some point out of Africa, and they did a big study, and it was a very low percentage of people that had it. So it's not really suggestive that everybody, because if we came from there, then much more people would have that. There's really, so there's more and more evidence that mounts up to challenge the theory, but because it sort of occupies this strange, untouchable space in terms of, well, what are you calling me a racist if I say we're not out of Africa? I mean, it's just following the science. I've got nothing against it, but people that don't want to openly challenge it, and a lot of these scientists won't go there, despite a lot of these articles.
Well, you just reminded me, talking about that, of this article that popped up 2 days ago. And the title of this article is "Sign of a Mysterious Human Ancestor Has Been Found in Our Spit." And as it turns out, it says a variation on the gene for our spit's mucus shows signs of having been passed down from a distant ancestor. Not only is this gene unique amongst modern humans, it looks nothing like the one possessed by our Neanderthal and Denisovan cousins, leading us to ask, just who did they get it from?
Right.
MUC7 is a gene that makes the long strings of protein called mucin, which gives our spit its thick, sticky quality. Not all MUC7 genes are alike, with a repeating region of code marking out variations that could be useful in tracing back different lineages in our modern human population.
Yeah.
That was the plan, anyway, for a team of researchers from the University of Buffalo in the U.S. who analyzed the mucin7 gene from more than 2,500 individual genomes from modern humans to see what secrets these differences might hold. Previous research had suggested a link between a number of repeating sequences and protections against asthma, though in this instance the researchers didn't find a correlation. They did happen to find a relationship between the MU7C genes and the kinds of microbes we have in our mouth, based on samples of microflora taken from 130 volunteers. But the big surprise was lurking quietly in the family tree. When we looked at the history of the gene that codes for the protein, we see the signature of archaic admixture in modern-day sub-Saharan African populations. In less clinical terms, it means that our ancient ancestors did a bit more than catch up for a friendly chat with another group of humans at some point in history. We're used to seeing archaic admixtures when it comes to multiple trysts between humans and Neanderthals, who interbred on multiple occasions over many tens of thousands of years across Europe and into Asia. And the same goes for the Denisovans, who coexisted, as they say, moved the piano, so to speak, with both humans and Neanderthals, before continuing on their migration into the East.
We're just moving the minor.
Signs of this kind of mingling has left traces of lost human tribes and migrations in our respective genomes, so it isn't surprising to find out we inherited a gene from another group of humans.
It's also not surprising that we're behaving like that. Have you seen the
Right. No. Hey, look, all you have to do is Google "man in Florida" and you'll find out that people will still sleep with things you should never mingle with. But anyway, the point of this is that they were able to identify this gene and that it had come from a different group of humans, but they don't know who that group of humans are or were, and we don't know. And it's just another thing that we don't know about where we came from and who we are. And
just more evidence
there's a lot of things that they've sort of discovered in an evolutionary sense recently, where actually it's the viruses and bacteria that coexist in our bodies that sort of help us evolve sideways. It's like this mixing of that stuff that is just as important as this, survival of the fittest.
We're all a big soup.
We are. We're big dirty soup for sure.
You've got a Neanderthal article and a Barrow article.
I do.
You've thrown in
the Barrow
an
article's not that long, but yeah, Neanderthals. I think they just have a bad rap. And I found a few articles and a study that actually addressed that, and I thought I'd bring it up because, as you mentioned, Neanderthals had larger brains than we do.
Yeah.
And they were much stronger than us. And it turns out that they weren't really the knuckle draggers that we think they were. And so I got some articles and I got a research study here, and I just want to share this because this is scientifically accepted in a lot of ways. It's just not really ever mentioned. We like to think that we're the pinnacle, like there was nothing ever that came before us that might have been at least as good, right? So, and it's a religious thing, and I don't know what it is, but it's pretty crazy. But anyway,
that's the divine prerogative.
Right. So this is how the study is introduced. The claim that Neanderthals are the ape-like ancestors of man is fraudulent. Darwinists employed the same technique they used with Australopithecus for the Neanderthals, an extinct human race. Neanderthal man entered the scientific literature with a discovery in 1856 of fossils in the Neander Valley near the German city of Düsseldorf. The curvatures in its skull and bone led it to being regarded by evolutionists as a supposed primitive human species. In 1908, an almost complete skeleton described as belonging to Neanderthal man was found in the French region of La Chapelle-aux-Saints. The bones were reassembled by the famous paleontologist and geologist at the time, Marcelin Boule. The Neanderthal man that emerged from this reassembly had a stooped posture and a protruding skull. Its legs were also locked to the joints, meaning it lacked a fully upright posture. Thanks to this appearance, the impression formed in people's minds that Neanderthal man was a primitive being. Neanderthals were also depicted as ape men in fictitious illustrations. This false impression of Neanderthals lasted for 100 years. But analysis of the La Chapelle skeleton in the 1950s determined that the Neanderthal to whom it belonged had a kind of joint infection. Healthy individuals were in fact able to walk just like normal human beings. In 1985, the same skeleton was examined by the anthropologist Erich Trinkhaus. That examination confirmed that Neanderthals walked upright and revealed another fact that had hitherto remained hidden. Marcelin Boule had deliberately portrayed Neanderthal as being stooped. And the study from Trinkhaus goes on to make 5 points. And the first point is, 1, the joint disorder identified in the 1950s was no obstacle to the individual walking upright. It appeared that the Darwinist Boule was unwilling to admit that the Neanderthal walked like a normal human being. Now, Eric Trinkhaus and W. Howells made the following statement in the Scientific American magazine. Today, most scientists would agree that Neanderthal man stood fully upright and that in the absence of disease, its features are no different than modern humans. So, meanwhile, the size of the Neanderthal skull also forced evolutionists into inconsistency. The reason was that Neanderthals had a skull volume of around 1700 cc. This is 200 cc more volume than that of today's human beings. The fact that Neanderthals, supposedly a primitive species, had a greater brain volume than Homo sapiens represented a huge contradiction for the theory of evolution. Neanderthal expert Trinkhaus admits, detailed comparisons of Neanderthal skeletal remains with those of modern humans have shown that there is nothing in Neanderthal anatomy that conclusively indicates locomotor, manipulative, intellectual, or linguistic abilities inferior to those of modern humans. There is no doubt that because Neanderthals were a human race, they possessed the same features as modern races. Neanderthal man was a talented maker of tools and a skilled hunter. He even engaged in music and art. They had cultural and social structure, just like societies today, and they had religious beliefs. They also buried their dead. The civilization established by the Neanderthals was therefore no different to present-day civilizations. Something else about the Neanderthals that represents an insuperable dilemma for Darwinists is the problem of dating. Fossils discovered showed that Neanderthals were living at the same time as modern human beings, and in some circumstances they were living after modern human beings. Biologist Francisco J. Ayala from the University of California says, a few years ago, they were thought to be ancestral to anatomically modern humans, but we now know that modern humans appeared at least 100,000 years ago. Of course, now we know that's 300,000 years, much before the disappearance of the Neanderthals. Moreover, in caves in the Middle East, fossils of modern humans have been found dated 120 to 100,000 years ago, as well as Neanderthals dated 60 and 70,000 years ago, followed again by modern humans dated at 40,000 years. It is unclear whether the two forms repeatedly replaced one another by migration, or whether they coexisted in some areas. Or mingled. I think now we probably know that there was a little bit of mingling. And the last point it makes is that the Neanderthals, offered as so-called ape-like ancestor of man, are therefore actually an extinct human race. In the same way that modern-day humans possess different features unique to their own races, so the Neanderthals also had their own unique characteristics. It's a huge fraud to use these as evidence for this evolutionary system. Indeed, the Neanderthal man fossil was removed from the scientific literature in 1978, but the Neanderthals still appear in Darwinist references as if they represented a great evidence of evolution. So this guy is really, I think he's somewhat anti our current understanding of evolution, which I don't really want to argue about, but the points that he makes about Neanderthal man makes a lot of sense to me. Their skulls were shaped differently, and I think that because their frontal lobe was smaller and more sloped, that scientists now say, well, in a human brain, all of our high motor function really happens in that middle and central part. or that front and central part. So it's really
Yes.
important, and they having that sloped skull makes them dumber. But I'm not sure that that's the case.
The
and
brains were bigger,
you look
the
at
back
all
of it
these
was bigger.
societies that have been emulating and artistically representing this elongated skull. And I'm not convinced that Neanderthals obviously used fire. They buried their dead. Who's to say we didn't learn from them? That they didn't teach us this stuff, or that we didn't learn from observing them?
Yeah, I think the takeaway from this is that we didn't come from them. They're a cousin, if not our brother, in terms of species. There's definitely put it this way, if they existed today, they'd probably be the guys playing football, because they're definitely, it's broom handles to axe like broomsticks to axe handles in terms of bone. There's definitely some differences, as you say. We have that forehead. They had a sloping forehead. They had brow ridges. We didn't. That sort of thing. There's some, but brains bigger. They had a culture. They had religious beliefs. We mingled. We had an overlapping civilization in the same way that there's different parts of Homo sapiens. There's different races. They may well have existed as another form of us. I mean, they could have been as smart as us. Who knows?
Some of the social studies that I've read on Neanderthals suggest that the females in the Neanderthal society actually moved from site to site to find a mate, and that this is why things, and the males actually stayed home with the children, but we just outbred them. We were just mingling like rabbits, and they had a very specific sort of thing that sort of happened. Sorry to interrupt.
You're right, mate, and we are clever little savages as well. So we're fascinating. That's fascinating. I learned some. I didn't know all that, and it does challenge most people. It's got to challenge your perception of what a Neanderthal is, and if you think about it, it's always that hulking, sloped.
The Cro-Magnon too, as I understand it, is essentially sort of midway between us and the Neanderthal in some ways, the hybrid, in some way, and they have larger brains than we did too. Yeah. But the Neanderthals being so much physically stronger, and having a large brain capacity, and having an evolved society, makes me wonder if some of these sites weren't actually Neanderthal.
And it's an interesting theory, and this is again that longer history and that crossover of history helps you. It gives rise to the plausibility of exploring these concepts. I'm not saying these are the answers, but they're worth exploring with the same degree of skepticism, everything else that we do to the current sort of assumption on how history evolved. And now, exactly like that. And I actually put some weight in, and I don't know how much science there is in this, but I think the idea that larger or different types of brains and some form of some sense or some capability or something that was attached to that, whether it be elongated skull people or Neanderthals with the back of their brain being much larger and the sides of it much larger than ours, whether that is somehow related to the construction method that was used at these megalithic sites, it's almost it's plausible. It's worth exploring. I don't know how to do that. It's plausible
if you look on Earth. If you look at dolphins and whales, we have 2 lobes for our brains as humans, and we think our brains are amazing. But the cetaceans have 4 lobes. These whales and dolphins and stuff, they have 4 lobes in their brains, and they're obviously very intelligent. So they're probably at least dealing. They've got really advanced sound lobes, and we know that because that's how they communicate and everything. But maybe there's more going on to some of this stuff.
I think so too, and it's something I believe if we continue with science and we look at something without letting it get caught up in politics and bias and all this crap, then we will get there, because that is how we shine a light on things. That's that scientific method, because it's like we will figure out what those lobes are for. It's like we're slowly figuring. There's so many mysteries in how those swarms of bees and just animals, and there's all sorts of communication and different mechanisms that we see happening in the world around us, and how specifics of evolutionary things evolve. We're going to find out eventually. I think it's just we shouldn't close our eyes to these sort of unknown options. I think they're worthy of exploration. And these sort of articles,
I think many things have been dismissed like far too early. There's stuff that was dismissed in the 1800s and early 1900s that needs to be reconsidered because it was dismissed for really bad reasons.
Well, we're finding that out. Great best example of that is the idea of catastrophism, this idea of one event that caused all this floods. We dismissed that because we're trying to get away from religion and their versions of cataclysm. Yeah, right. We're still figuring that out. I think if we can slowly get away from science and
Look, science is
sorry,
really
not science,
important.
slightly away from politics and religion and all the other aspects of it, then and just investigate it on its merits, then we'll get there eventually. But we don't. It's hard to do.
Absolutely. Look, science is really important, and we need to always, pay attention and learn what we can and figure out what we can through science. But at the same time, I mean, mathematics is probably the best language that we have and the best lens
way of describing
to look at the universe and what's going on. And yet our knowledge of mathematics is really limited. And when we have to put a lot of weight in science. At the same time, science hasn't yet decided whether milk is good for us. There's there's problems. We don't know enough
and let's
to
be clear,
act like we can.
Yeah, science knows very little about consciousness. That whole aspect of, and this is not a topic we
what
often
is,
talk about.
What
but
is
that,
consciousness?
Whether we are generating
Do
it,
we
or
have
whether
a
we're
soul?
or whether we're a TV that's tuned into a signal from outside. We don't know, can't tell. Nobody knows what happens when we die. All these sort of things. This is not covered by science yet. But that doesn't mean we should be closing our eyes to these concepts and possibilities.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of these articles support it. Now, did you have one more you want to do, or do you want me to get to the fun one that we can use to close this? Because this, I'm looking forward to this one that I've got.
Give me 45 seconds on this barrow, because there's not a lot to really be said. But they discovered a barrow, a long stone barrow, which is most likely a Neolithic burial chamber, like most of the other ones in Wiltshire. And I'll read some really quickly. It says, ancient house of dead has been unearthed near Stonehenge, Neolithic burial chamber, which likely dates to approximately 5,600 to 5,700 years ago. Would have been an earthen structure that housed the skeletons of some of the earliest inhabitants of Britain. The burial structure, known as a long barrow, was discovered in the Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire, England, which is dotted with ancient ruins from this period. It's a very rare type of monument, and a monument type we do not get to excavate very often, said Jim Leary, director of the Archaeological Field School at the University of Reading in England, who was leading the excavations. This is the first one in 50 years that's been excavated in Wiltshire in its entirety. The burial chamber was discovered in what looked like an ordinary wheat field thanks to aerial footage, blah, blah, blah. We can get through all this stuff. Salisbury Plain, England, is home to a stunning array of ancient monuments, from Stonehenge to the mysterious fire monument near Avebury Circle to the chalk mound known as Silbury Hill. It's not clear why so many of these ancient monuments have been found in the region. The one likely reason is that it's not been very sparsely occupied in recent human history, meaning these monuments have not been plowed over through the millennia by farmers, Leary said. However, the river valleys of the Avon and Kennet rivers, which flow through Wiltshire, do seem to have had special sacred significance for ancient people, which may mean more monumental architecture was constructed there. Anyway, so that ties into the whole water at all these ancient sites. Anyway, the early excavations revealed, basically, they expect it to date to around 3700 BC. They don't know yet because they haven't actually dug any of it up. Right. What's really funny is that, again, this guy says, oh, well, it's probably older than Stonehenge, because, they give Stonehenge a really, really crappy date. But what even if you want to give Stonehenge like that date of 2500 BC or whatever it is, they found stuff. There was a wooden henge there, really large wooden henge, more than one, and they've been able to carbon date that wood to 10,000 years old. They've actually painted like the tops of those. They're in the damn parking lot. I mean, it's crazy. That's 10,000-year-old wooden henge post that's in the ground there, that they've painted white, and they've just built a fucking parking lot around a lot of them. They're all in the parking lot, 10,000 years old.
Wow. Yeah, it shit keeps getting older, doesn't it? It just goes into that pile. We've been around and we've been doing stuff and we've been tinkering and building and try some megalithic building sometime. Anyone who thinks that those types of things that are going to stand there for 10,000 years, imagine the wooden poles are just massive in circumference. Try doing it. I've tried moving some rocks. It's not easy. I don't know what the guy at Coral Castle's doing. He's probably figured it out. But there's, it's this stuff takes organization. And one of the things that all of these megalithic things, the point I like to make to people, you know what it takes? It takes a shitload of spare time. Like you have to have support and spare time to embark on these sort of things. You have to have such a big support staff to grow the food, to provide the calories, to do the planning. You need the intelligence to do the planning and design. You need the organization to put people together. But whacking together 20 tons and all these different things.
You've got to
feed everybody, have everybody, like put
and
them all in one place.
You've got to have the plan.
You've got to deal with their poop. I mean, this thing takes organization and effort, and it takes civilization. So just saying that they stuck this wooden thing. It was probably only 3 or 4 dudes that did this.
You know what Zahi would tell you.
Yes, well,
he would tell you national project. Shame on you.
Yes,
when everyone comes together, anything
Indeed.
can happen.
Yes, everybody comes together. National project. Yes, yeah. I mean, and I think we've mentioned this before, but the national project concept. It's like I look at it like look at the moon missions. Yes, that was a national project, but we didn't just collectively throw the astronauts at the moon, did we? There was some technology and technical stuff involved. There was some sophisticated friggin' concepts involved in pitching those dudes at the moon and getting them back.
Yep.
Yeah, whatever we did, but
just a couple.
Yeah, that doesn't carry any water. Anyway, all right. That shit keeps getting older. So, I have one. It's a very interesting article. I think we can finish with this article on the formalities of reading these articles, but. This article comes to us from a place we've talked about, actually. Gunung Padang, and Luke having been there, I have not, but the wonderful footage. If you watch some of the Hancock interviews, we used a lot of the footage from there.
I'm working on a video of my trip to Gunung Padang. I actually need to do a little diatribe over it. It's ready to go.
That'd be good. We could also do a podcast, just a bit more informal, talking about it and just watching. We could do this would be a good video podcast where we do just watching all the footage, because there's so much of this footage.
The footage is actually ready. If you want to do it with me, we can do it together. It's about 30, 32, 33 minutes long.
All right, cool. Well, we should do something.
We could do a half-hour one.
So let me do this, but this is an article from Dedik News, which I think is, let's see, it's news.dedik.com. So it's an Indonesian paper, and actually it's a Google translation. Thank you, Google. This is in Indonesian.
Bahasa.
Bahasa, there you go.
It's Bahasa, yeah.
And so the translation comes across a little funny, but it's quite interesting, I found. This is, I'm not sure about how credible, but very interesting. It's worth a discussion like this. So, Jakarta, the Integrated Research Independent Team, TTRM, of Gunung Padang has completed its initial research. A number of samples have been researched and prepared reports. Something special is said to be found. So, basically the team working on the site has finished up, I guess, their initial reports. And this is the recent effort. Let me just dating this again. This is July 24th. So pretty today. I printed that today. That's not right. This was published on.
I think this is 2 years.
Actually,
old.
this is old.
Article.
Sorry, this is 2013. Shit.
Oh yeah.
I didn't notice.
4 years old.
Yeah, 4 years old. There you go.
This is just weird because I came across this article, but it was old. But what caught my eye was that. Well, go ahead.
So this was interesting. So Eric Rizzi, a member of TTRM, the Integrated Research Team, said that the research report on Mount Padang will be reported to President SBY, several ministries, West Java government, and the Cianjur Regency. From that report, the research will be continued by the state. The research team found 4 layers on Mount Padang. According to Eric, layers 1 and 2 will be followed up by the Ministry of Education of Culture or local government, while the other 2 layers, called privileged, will be determined by the president. While the 3rd and 4th layers are, quote, very special and no two in this world, just seem to be the domain. So they're saying that these are like nothing else like it has been found. So this is a very special find, like nothing. It challenges, I guess, whatever else is nothing else in the world is like it, I guess.
Right.
What special findings?
The reports on the 3rd and 4th levels will be privileged.
Yes.
So it's. I assume that the 3rd and 4th levels they're talking about are the deepest levels.
Yes, I think so.
The furthest. I mean, that's how it is on every diagram I've seen of the place.
The later ones, right?
The top level is 1.
This is the analysis of the samples. Yeah. So let me finish this translation. So this is a question. So what's special about the findings? Based on the analysis of a number of published findings, allegedly a technology special tucked away under layers of mountain. So special technology. Previously, the researchers found a chamber or chambers, giant cup, rivers and springs, domes, towers, and the aquifer, as well as the transmitter, is the translation. It was also found anomalous magnetic fields at the site. So, anomalous magnetic fields, I know there's these chambers we've talked about Gunung Padang. I think they're analysing the artifacts that they've pulled up. I know they did drill core samples. I know they pulled stuff up. This is the only thing I've heard about analysis of it, but... these findings point to a device similar to a hydroelectric energy generator, Special Staff of President Andy Ariel, who is also part of the research team, says. So this is actually quoted from somebody on the research team, I guess. Indeed, there are a number of findings in Mount Padang, but he did not want to provide detailed information on what is in the special building. Culture layer 1 and 2. Okay, this is in the local language, but as we said before, there's culture layer 1 and 2 are just they're going to continue to look at that for the local government. Layers 3 and 4. If the reactors are analysed, I need to ask details to the researchers. Many people are coming to the same thing. I cannot precede the researchers' conclusions. I can only make sure that the contents are sophisticated technology, he continued. Yeah. So research on the side of Mount Padang has indeed invited the attention of many parties when discussed. The site is associated with many pyramids, although many are calling the model of Mount Padang terraces. So we talked about that, right? It could be a man-made huge structure like a pyramid, but we've definitely built and built the terraces.
Well,
on
one
top
of the
it,
things that they talk about is this, because it comes up in this sort of honeycomb, the lava, because that's an ancient volcano, right? So the lava comes up and it's in this sort of honeycomb shape, and then you can fracture each one of those things off, and they become like these logs that you can use.
And columnar basalt or columnar andesite?
Yes, it's columnar andesite, which is a type of basalt. So So when they laid this stuff down on the top level, they built all these terraces, and there's no argument that was done by humans. It's clearly, obviously laid together, stacked on top of one another to make specific walls and levels. Clearly human, and the rest of it kind of looks like a natural mountain. But what they've actually found is that there's a further 4 levels like underneath that top level, which is the 5 terraces, and that they are made too. It looks like they're made too.
And there's cavities
even in the lower levels. There's cavities in there, but even in the lower levels, this columnar andesite is like stacked, like in these sideways stacks all the way up. So it's something that on the top levels we say was done by humans. And on the top level, they want to argue that it's a natural procedure and that in some cases this lava can come out sideways perfectly like that, but not be joined together still like it's a honeycomb. They're all, so and when you go there, it's really hard to see. There's vegetation over the whole thing. There's trees everywhere. You can't tell. You can see the stuff that's on the terraces, but you can't really get an idea of what's underneath that mountain without sophisticated equipment.
And so Danny Hillman, Natawajaya did the study, and he was pulling up carbon dated remains. So from inside this space, this pyramid shaped structure to like 25,000 years ago, like crazy sort of dates in terms of the Orthodox, but right in the window for what we've been talking about. And now this is an article from obviously a few years ago, but I actually haven't seen much follow up from this or anything like it that talks about actually analysis of the materials. I've heard all sorts of things.
Because they stopped.
It's a brand new site. That's right.
That's
right. They stopped shortly after this, didn't they? When he got kicked off the project. And you didn't see there was much
when they changed the president. And then there was no work going on.
So it's just a little touristy site that it's hard to get to.
Yeah, there were people gathering and bringing like phones from like 2003 and like wheeler dealing them on a huge canvas up on the upper terrace level. It's bizarre. Sure. People trying to sell me like Nokias from like 2004.
Yeah.
Bizarre.
Great. Anyway, so I mean, it's such a mysterious site. I wish we could get the work done on this site. But I mean, I'm not taking this article seriously so much as I just think it's a funny little report that came out of there that suggests that this could be a paradigm shifting site if we actually got into it and really analyzed it.
There's stuff on the lower levels too that they pulled out that has this orange cement. I mean, it's held together by like an orange concretion. It looks like concrete or cement. Now, I mean, there are natural forms of concretion, but for all of this stuff underneath there, uniformly, very smoothly, to have this perfectly orange cement, like it looks constructed. When you look at the pictures, it looks constructed.
Right. Yeah, well, who knows? Stuff keeps getting older, right?
Right.
Yes. That's a good place to probably leave it, I think, for one of these podcasts. We've got a few articles in. I hope it wasn't too many. I enjoyed it. I learned a few things about Neanderthals. Thank you for that.
Pukajay.
Pukajay.